the internal audit department, alignment with strategy, alignment to ERM, those are two of the areas where I say you could have a lot of impact and you could show a lot of impact. It's not just like we're doing internal audit uh, because it's on a risk-based formula, but we're also doing it to the strategy of the company and tying that back in. And that's how you get the audit committee to come on board with internal audit.
This episode is brought to you by Green Skies Analytics, an audit analytics service provider that works with internal audit departments that have data analysts and are still frustrated with trying to make analytics actually work, aren't getting the expected ROI, who can't break through the communication barrier between the analysts and the audit team, and those that need experienced direction for an audit analytics strategy and process. Those that feel like they've wasted time and money on trainings, aren't getting the value they want, not prioritizing the highest risk areas for the organizations, or have projects that seemingly never get completed. Do you deal with any of that? If you do, go to the show notes of this episode and click the Green Skies Analytics link, or go to greenskiesanalytics.com to schedule a call and understand how Green Skies Analytics makes analytics actually work for internal audit.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Audit Podcast. I'm your host, Trent Russell, and today on the show we have Mark Freeman. Mark is the head of internal audit at Vermeer Corporation, where they manufacture agricultural and industrial equipment. When we did the initial kickoff call to figure out topics and logistics and all that kind of stuff for the show, Mark was about to attend a CAE roundtable, and so we got some insight into that. Some of the areas they talked about, recruitment still tops the agenda for most CAEs, certainly for the group that Mark was with. Talked about metrics that they're sharing with the audit committee, and Copilot use cases all kind of topped the list there. So probably no surprise, recruiting still very much the top. Communications with the audit committee still very much at the top, and AI still very much at the top. From that topic of metrics shared with the audit committee, Mark was able to share some of his audit committee materials. So if you're not watching this on our YouTube channel, be sure to go check that out. Fast forward, do whatever you want to get to that point. But Mark pulls that up. It is scrubbed down to some degree, of course, but there's still metrics and other areas that you could potentially communicate to your audit committee, or at least kind of get an idea of what Mark is presenting, and then go to yours and go, hey, would you also want to know this, this, or this? They say yes, cool, bring it in, and that way you can leverage what Mark has shared with you. One of the other things that we really talk about is change management, and not change management from the IT audit perspective, but change management within the organization. And so when Mark came in as the head of internal audit, there was this negative connotation of internal audit when he got there. And so we spent a lot of time focusing on, okay, you came into basically a bad situation. How did you turn that around? All right, with that said, here we go. What is in your either your internet browsing history or maybe like your Copilot history, ChatGPT, anything like that? Again, it could be professional or personal, anything. Just kind of let us know what's going on in Mark's world recently.
Cool. Yeah, I think recently, so I'm a big YouTube podcast person, so I like my current addiction is Charlie Munger. And so Warren Buffett's right hand for a while, and he passed away, I think, about 2 years ago, maybe a little bit less than that. And so his process and just the frameworks he used from a thought process are really something else. And I think it's I happened to see him on or heard about him on a podcast, and I said, you know what, I don't know anything about him, and I want to go and see what his thought process were from investing and working with Warren Buffett, and then like what kind of insights can I get from internal audit? And really, there's a lot of different things that he does. He has a lot of different mental frameworks that he puts himself through before making big investments or big opportunities that he's looking at and reviewing. And a lot of them, I think, are relevant to some of what we can do from internal audit perspective. And so one of them is inversion, is about inverting the problem or inverting the situation instead of saying, you know, what's the good outcome, what's the bad outcome, or the other way around. If you're looking for the bad outcome, you know, what are the good outcomes, and kind of going through the motion from that framework. And I thought that was kind of unique.
Is there any other lessons learned for those that aren't going to maybe take a deep dive into the Charlie Munger YouTube world? Is there anything else where you're like, if there's like maybe like the 80-20 thing? Like, so I think what you just mentioned is great. It's
Yeah.
a pretty good framework. But anything else you're like, if there's one thing I would recommend, it would be this.
Oh man, he has so many different. I think one of the other takeaways I have from it is that we get very stuck in what we think we know, and the hardest thing about us from making a decision is unlearning the unlearning process. So we get stuck. We've learned something 20 years ago, or this was the way that I do one for that I've seen in management. Right? It's like I don't want internal controls because internal controls slow you down. Well, that was my thought process 20 years ago. And how can you unlearn that behavior from somebody for someone to say, that's no longer a true scenario? What really is true is that you help me from making mistakes. And how do you go back and teach somebody or re educate somebody in that thought process?
All right. I'll do a little bit of a semi deep dive on Charlie then. I like those frameworks, especially the one about making big decisions. I think that's
Oh,
cool. I
yeah.
want to try that out. I like that.
He does have a lot of good ideas and like in the middle of the so I'm in the middle of the journey and I usually like to share these kind of things with my team. I think last if you asked me last week, I think we were looking at the Ash conformity experiment, uh, and then we're looking at the Dunning-Kruger effect. And so all of them have to do with thought process and how you get out there and how do you get people to change their minds or how does that group think work and everything. It's yeah, fascinating
Okay.
information.
I think I agree. I like that. All right. I know that you were part of a CAE roundtable. And I love when the timing of these work out to where
Yeah,
it's like, yeah, we just had one of these because then we get to
yeah.
go, sweet, share with everybody else what you all talked about. Um, and I'm assuming there was various industries in there. I don't even know if it really matters. I think for some of the topics that we might hit on, if industry matters, but I would assume that there's various industries. But what did you guys talk about? What was the maybe the one of the biggest takeaways, or what was on the agenda, or what was a maybe an aha moment for you? You can take that any one of those questions any way you want.
I think one of the things that are kind of interesting is so what we call it, is the recruitment and the talent that's out there right now, and try to do you're trying to fill a role. That was the first thing on the agenda. When I first came, so I'm from Pella, Iowa. It's a small 10,000 person town. If you've heard of Pella, you probably know Pella Windows, Pella Doors, right? Is one of our not competitor, but competitor for talent. And so Vermeer does a lot of manufacturing for heavy equipment. And so, you we're looking at similar talent in a small town. The closest cities maybe an hour away where you have Des Moines is located at, and that's where you're kind of most of the recruiters tell me we have about an hour, 45-minute area where people are willing to travel. So it's a little bit further for our position. Uh, when I first came into the role, it took us like 6 months to fill our our open position, and it was a struggle. And not used to it. I worked in big cities before, so and then it was like, welcome to the Midwest. It's going to take you 6 months to fill this position, and uh, when you start to look at it, and you really start to think about like how hard it is nowadays. You have different challenges. So we have the location challenge at where I'm located at. And you start to look at like the IAA Vision 2035 and start to think about uh, job satisfaction. And you look at like one of the amazing things to me is like people over 30 years of experience have 50%, what they call job satisfaction. And that kind of shocked me for a little bit. And then the other one was like the 0 to 10 is under 21%. And then we kinda ask ourselves, why does nobody want to go into internal audit, right? So, well, you got 21% job satisfaction. Who wants to come into that position? I wouldn't want it to come into that position. I think when you start I have a new person on my team that we just hired maybe about 6 months ago, and which was a different recruiting process. But if I was to tell him that, uh, that stat before he came in or if, he would never have joined the team. It was said, "That sounds depressing. Why would I wanna do that?" So this time around, I think what happened so I had a team member of mine who had just been doing internal audit and think she was at that 10-year marker and wanted to try something different. So this is somebody who's done it since the intern and say, "I wanna stretch, I wanna go out there," which I fully encourage. to me, internal audits it's not the last stop. It's kind of like one of those places to really get you exposed to the rest of the business. And so when this time around was a much different process for us. It didn't take us 6 months uh, lead time. It was more of a, hey, we have 3 weeks lead time, and now we have I have over a dozen qualified applicants who are applying. And so the thing that really changed, and this is one of the things I think I've seen from different internal audit groups that I've been a part of, where I've been a part of 6 different companies, I think, which are range in size and scale. But I don't see a lot of internal recruitment going on. And so, like we'll go into the company, and a lot of times, they're not coming looking for transfers within internal audit. That's really the first place that we should be looking is, who's out there? What can we do differently to make sure that we're exposing people to internal audit? And then, and getting those internal applicants. I think we had a half a dozen uh, internal applicants and then another half a dozen or so well qualified people from the surrounding area.
What's the proposition to the internal folks to go, hey, come join our team?
I think exposure. And so one of the things that we did or we have been doing is really going out into the areas that even that we're not auditing and making sure that we're getting exposure there. From the leaders, we have a lot of leadership support for internal audits, which much different than it was 4 years ago when I came to Vermeer. And just making sure that people are aware, like, this is a place to be. This is somewhere where you get a lot of different exposure. There's a lot of different opportunities. You have growth opportunity and educational opportunities within internal audit, not only for yourself, but then also for just to learn about the industry at large.
Okay. Is there any other, if someone's listening and they're like, okay, we're definitely going to start tapping into internal folks more. How should we do it? So I think the proposition you made makes sense, but is there anything else that you feel like, you should also consider doing this, or we did that, or even we tried this and didn't really work that great, and then we did try this and this worked really great, or we're in the process of trying this and the results we don't really know. But anything else that anyone, because everybody struggles with this still,
Yeah.
hiring and retention is still an issue across the board. Um, for pretty much every internal audit leader that we talked to, there's one out of like 15 that we asked. It was like, that's not my biggest issue right now. Everybody else is like, that's our number one thing. So literally anything that you could say
Yeah.
that would
Yeah.
help everybody, literally every other internal audit leader would be fantastic.
Yeah. And I think we call it really, it starts off with looking at that job description and making sure that you're casting a wide net and making sure that you're not limiting yourself to the talent that's out there. And it used to be, I want an accountant. But if you look at the industry right now, there's a shortage of accountants and you have a shortage of CPAs. And so the market is dealing with that. When you're looking from engagement with colleges and trying to make sure that you are uh, I mean, some of us have a lot of years of experience. I won't say everybody, but some of us do. And and there's opportunity there for you to go out there and speak to colleges. I think I just spoke like last semester at our local college, and while we didn't recruit anybody, one of the funny things is like our external auditors said, "Oh, I remember you speaking at our class and everything else." And so there's that positive relationship and somebody we know, going on. One of the interesting things that's come out of one of our internship is that we think that it's limited, that internship is really limited uh, from like we're just recruiting that person. Well, what happened though, about a year or two after we had a last intern leave, that person was so impressed with the way that, from our department and the culture we brought from the company that we were able to recruit his mom to come and work for us. And she told me, she said, this is one of the reasons, you're one of the reasons why, I'm coming to work over here. And that's really great. So you have to really think about, how, you know, they're interns, but give them that really positive experience. And we call it the department does a really great job. And then also the company does a really great job too, as well. Professional associations, of course, well, I get exposure, just from the local chapter and everything like that. Uh, it's not just up to me, but I have a team member who's a very strong number two who goes out there and is involved in women in manufacturing, and they get exposure from that process as well, and are known throughout the company for that. And so those are great opportunities that it just doesn't have to be the leader who's carrying it. It could be staff too who's carrying those.
Yeah, I
Uh,
think the leadership obviously makes a ton of sense.
yep,
And then, strategically, whoever, if you have like that super charismatic person on your team,
yep.
send them out because I know if there's a room full of people, I'm like, oh, well, I want to work with that person. Can I get to work with them?
Oh yeah,
So definitely don't send necessarily like the stick in the mud person who one doesn't want to do it because then probably not going to get good results. But if there's somebody who's excited about it or passionate about it, then I absolutely send them out into the field.
oh yeah. It's a great opportunity, and for everybody else, it's a great development opportunity.
Yeah. All right. Well, you mentioned 4 years ago when you came in that internal audit wasn't exactly positioned in a positive light. And you were able to change that. So you changed this negative connotation of internal audit when you got there. And I'm sure it wasn't immediate. And I know, like off camera, you mentioned crafting that story. What was that story? Like, how did you do that? Because I feel like even right now, there's a lot of audit leaders who are still dealing with that. Like, management still, doesn't really like us a ton, and they have this negative view of internal audit. As much detail, as specific and strategic as you can tell us, what did you do to change that image?
Yeah. And it's a challenge. It's always been a challenge. So I've been in audit for 25 years. And I keep up with the industry, and a matter of fact, 2 days ago, I was on a John Hall seminar, uh, and they were talking about, KPMG sent out a survey to audit committee members saying that only 45% of audit committee members are satisfied with their internal audit departments. And so this has always been one of those things where, uh, it baffles me, and also I'm like, How can we change that image?" And we haven't really. It's just tracking it through the years, always been that 50-50 type area. I will tell you that this is the first time, uh, that I really had a chance to really think about, that maturity of my experience to really say, how can I better align? It's not just like, let's go make an audit plan, let's go do the risk, let's go do the audits. And I think that's been uh, kind of the failure of audit programs throughout. Is kind of like we pay attention to that, and then we could get into the whole SOX, and we're asked to do different compliance areas. And it's hard to see value there. Uh, but really, the internal audit department alignment with strategy, alignment to ERM, those are two of the areas where I say you could have a lot of impact and you could show a lot of impact. It's not just like we're doing internal audit uh, because it's on a risk-based formula, but we're also doing it to the strategy of the company and tying that back in. And that's how you get the audit committee to come on board with internal audit. A little different format because where I'm at too, it's privately held, so I don't have to do the compliance and the SOX uh, stuff, but I have before in another life. And so when you start to think about that, that's one of the key areas is like, how are you showing your value? How are you showing that measurement? It has to make sense just, from a management perspective to audit committee. Uh, and then that second line of defense. So important when you target talking about cybersecurity and IT security. When I first came on, we were doing quarterly meetings, and that was one of the relationships uh, that we had to repair uh, within internal audit because we did not have a good relationship with them, and that takes time, and you have to sit down with people. Another thing when I first came in is identifying what matters. You do have to sit down with the leaders and identify what they think matters to them from intra perspective.
That's where I want to interject real quick because you mentioned the strategy also, and I hear when we say that to some CAEs and audit leaders, are like, well, I don't. They won't tell me the strategy. Like I don't have access to the strategy. Similarly, it's like I don't have access really to the executive. So how did you go about that? Where you're just like, hey, I'm an audit CFO. I need 30 minutes a quarter. Okay, like we're gonna do it. Or like, how did you basically sell the idea of the 30 minutes or whatever it was that you're going to spend with me periodically, this is the return basically you're going to get on it, to where you can look at the strategy, whether it's a formalized one and, all that kind of good stuff, or if it's just kind of word of mouth and knowing what's top of mind for the executives. How are you able to do that?
I wish I could tell you it was my idea, and I wish I could take credit for it, but actually it came from the board. And
Okay.
so,
Well,
as
hey, we edit this show, so we're going to edit that part out.
I'll take credit for it. No. So my VP that I report to, administratively, and then have the normal lines like everybody else. So she's involved in strategy as well as the financial planning and analysis, and then she also has recently just has IT under her too. And so I get a lot of interaction uh, because of that relationship. But I think that it is important to really understand that strategy, and I don't think it's a trade secret. I think it makes your internal audit better. This is one of the things that the audit committee, I think if it was up to me and I had to go about it a different way, and if I was having pushback, I would definitely encourage the audit committee chair to kind of suggest to management to get more value. That's another thing that I've seen in some of the um, another thing that I've seen from audit committees that they request that internal audit be more engaged in the audit in the strategy of the company. And so, yeah, I think that would be a way I would go. First, I would go internally, just try to say, "Hey, this will make us better. This will make us more effective from a management." And every management team is different. Every audit committee is different. So, and audit committee changes over quite a bit sometimes.
We're talking audit committees. I think what a lot of people are interested in are reporting to the audit committee. What do you report? What do you show? How do you show it? All that kind of good stuff. We did a really great episode recently where someone showed their audit committee dashboard that they put together in Power BI, and I think that was really great. But what are the metrics, maybe specific to the audit committee, that you share? Like, what do they want to know? As well as what is it that you want to know? So, like, what metrics are you tracking for yourself, or for your team rather, that you really care about?
Really, for me and for the audit committee, I think the one that I press into them is the impact. So, how can you tell internal audits making an impact to the organization? Uh, it's the one true that probably most organizations do is the open close pass through, with the focus on the high findings. And so, when I first started my position, we had probably 5 or 6 times the number of open observations that we have now. And so being able to show like it is not just enough for internal audit to be able to come in and say, "Hey, we found this mistake or error. It's up to management to fix." That's no longer, I think, good enough for internal audit. Where we need to be is how do we push, how do we engage, how do we assist in getting these uh, open findings closed. And that's really one of the key things where you could show the internal audit impact. I think anybody with a stick can kind of come in and say, this is what's wrong. As a matter of fact, in my history, I could just go up and interview a manager and they'll say, this is wrong. They'll have a list. They'll have like, hey, here's my top 10 things that are wrong. I just don't know how to prioritize it. This is where it comes down to, let me help you from internal audit perspective, prioritize those risks and show you where some of those areas of opportunity lie and how we could kind of like put a dollar figure to it. And I think this is where we add value. There's other things that we're doing from a quarterly. So we do the pretty typical report out observations and whatnot. And I will share with you. All right. And so I like to call it looking back to move forward. I'm not a big look back person. So, uh, but I forced myself to do it once a year. One of the things about audit committee when you get into is that they're only looking at you quarter to quarter. Maybe you're spending, 15 to 25 minutes with them. And so from a collectiveness, I like to tell them, what's the direct impact of internal audit, right? And so we'll look at our audit projects that we have for the year and have that reflection back where it's like, this is our direct impact. And what I mean by direct impact is the quantifiable weaknesses. So we may not extrapolate that because I do not want to get into this is not something to get into the discussion of, hey, you can't extrapolate that or or anything. It's just based on the pure finding and the items that we looked at. We also kind of have our special project area, which is internal control assessment of like for this past year, where we say, hey, and we really don't make donuts, but I needed another name there. But
Okay. I was super curious about that. I was like, is that a code name or what is that?
and so yeah, it's time to make the donuts. And so but we've actually found or identified some areas of internal controls where, you know, where there's opportunity there to actually, improve upon. And same thing with a special project. So we'll have a special project where, again, there's a control weakness that we're identifying and say, by going into these areas and enhancing the controls into these dollar areas, we're helping the company. And then there's some other stuff because from a softer touch, right? It's kind of like, where are you helping the business? So we're big in the Toyota way at Vermeer. It's one of the philosophies that they have implemented. And so, because Kaizen event is the internal control process, and so we get asked, or we do go to different Kaizen events to just be a part of. And so we don't own any of the controls that come out of these events. We just give recommendations or ask questions. Uh, so it is one of the areas though that our CEO has said to me and said, "This is an area that I really enjoy you being a part of, to ask the questions, to make sure that people are doing, not only what they should be doing, but to really think and force themselves to rethink a process that we have." And these could be like from a manufacturing perspective, which is majority of the Kaizen event or manufacturing, but also from a business impact. We have special projects, so internal control projects or different, just different areas of the business that we could get into that are year-long projects. And then from book study and then education, these two I do like to put on the emphasize because I have a couple of former educators and people who are who take the education portion very seriously. And so they help, and internally we do too. I do. It's one a part of my philosophy is that continuous learning. Uh, and then of course we have I put this one in there because there's a uh, LinkedIn certification. So applying generative AI as a business professional, I think got a lot of different uh, perked up a lot of heads when we start to say that because a lot of our team members and departments have yet to go in that direction.
What's the book study? Is that literally just books that were read, or is there more to it than that? Like, what is
Mm.
book study?
No, it's literally books that are
Books that were
read
read.
and,
Okay.
and places we're going with it. So
If there was, I don't, I like the way this one person asked this question, but it's kind of difficult within kind of the audit world. But they would pose the question of what book have you gifted the most? Like, what book have you given away the most? What would that be?
Simon Sinek, Start with the Why would probably be the one, and I love all this stuff anyway, but that is a great one to start from a root cause analysis and making sure like you're addressing the root cause.
Okay. I found that I don't want to say the best audit leaders and the best auditors, but the ones that will like crack open a book about internal audit usually are the better ones compared to everyone else. And I think it's directly from what you learn from reading the book, but then it's also if you're willing to read a book about internal audit, I think that says something about your willingness to learn about the profession in general. I know, like once I started really cracking those open, and like I read every day, and so it not unusual on a Saturday night for me to be reading Richard Chambers or a Norman Marks or something like
Yep,
that as I go to sleep. But I have found that to be, and that's what when like we have an intern right now, and I was like, I don't know if you're a book reader. Here's all the audit books I would recommend, and if you really want to do this, like that is a really like you're going to be light years ahead of anyone else that's at your kind of peer level if you just do that.
agree. And I'm a big podcast person, so I think I spend an insane amount of time, and I will tell you that podcast has or Spotify has their top listeners. Like I'm almost ashamed. and, and where I lie in the list, so I'm like in the top 10% uh podcast listeners. And so it's not just it's well, you're in my top five.
All
And so
right,
I give you a shout out there.
thank you.
Uh but then but then there's also a bunch of, what world events that you're listening to, what's next on the radar, uh, manufacturing podcasts as well, because that's just the industry you're in, and really, and I've been in a lot of different industries. You do want to know what's going on in your industry to kind of see what's that future kind of holding, what's that emerging risk coming at you.
And I like the podcast way also. And usually, what I'll do is like we have our Alexa in the kitchen, and so like that's where I eat lunch. And so during lunch, I'll just go, "Hey Alexa, play a data podcast or play an AI related podcast." And it's I don't pick the podcast itself. I just go, "You pick it." I don't even care. And it'll start up, and if I go, "No, don't really care about that," and I'll just go, "I do a different one," and it does, and eventually I'll just land on one and go, "Oh yeah," and I might not have discovered it otherwise had I not done it that way. But then that's how I like to do it, and you get a lot of variety that way as well. So that's one approach that I take.
Yeah, and that's awesome. I think recently, Founders, which talks about all the entrepreneur founders, uh, who've gone out there. Excellent podcast, and really tells, like, a different perspective that we don't think about, where internal auditors are more risk averse, and so listening to somebody who's actually out there, and how to create a company and what they went through and the trials is just a different mindset. And I like to get into that mindset to understand the different risk takers within the business.
My note says lunch listen founders podcast.
Oh
So
yeah.
you've added one to their listening crew.
It's great. My what we call VP actually turned me on to it
Okay,
recently. So yep,
excellent. All
great.
right. Um, Not a great segue here, not a segue even a little bit, but I know we've talked Copilot in the past, and so any use cases relative to Copilot where you found it of use,
Yeah.
where you could go, audit leader, do this, or even staff or whoever else on the audit team. But how are you using Copilot for yourself? Like, what are you doing?
Yeah. And I think our journey into Copilot is interesting. I think about a year and a half ago, maybe a year and a quarter or so, uh, when I started to get more and more into the AI and Copilot and everything, my team was very resistant to the, "Hey, I don't understand this. What are we doing with this tool? It looks very risky to us." They were definitely not a fan of it. And during that process of saying, "Okay, let's get some training involved. Let's make sure we're sitting down." So part of that certification I showed on that other chart was, let's all sit down in a room, let's all get that certification, and let's see the benefits of it, because we're gonna be asked to audit it. Whether we like it or not, you're gonna have to go in there and figure out the business use case for it, right? So it's like, okay, what is the business use case? What does it mean when we're talking about tokens and tokenization, and when you start thinking about feeding the data into the AI machine, and what does that look like, right? And and you start to get into some of it. It brings you back into the whole data governance conversation that we've been having, but then people start to look at their data a little bit more. For a use case for us for internal audit, I'm definitely using on almost a daily basis for ideation, and just to kind of say, I think this is the way it works, but kind of explain it to me, and using it to make sure that my thoughts align with it from an ideation perspective. And one of my team's directives for the year, and I'm not a big directive person, but when we get observations, I want my team to throw the observations within Copilot to say, what questions would you have if you're an executive or a leader or all set on the audit committee? And I believe in beating up our observations, and we do beat them up to death, because we'll go through and say, "Did we do this? Did we do that?" I think it's a great tool for that, especially for some of our, not so experienced team members, where I'm going to go in, I'm going to use this and see what feedback before I give it to, the senior to review. And so it's a great fact checker, and it tells you what, you may not have everything in there, but you better know the answers to the questions that might be asked from it, right? So yeah.
A quick note, if so your Copilot is private, secure, so you're able to put your observations in there and it's not a problem. There's no or extremely low risk that it's going to get out and anybody else is going to be aware of that. So I just want to make a note if you have like if you log in to Chat GPT on your personal email or something, do not take your company's observations, issues, whatever you guys call them. Do not put those in there.
Yeah, and so we don't use, we can only use our, we call Copilot. So we have, where we have our own, uh, service and everything. And so our own service with that. And so we can't even go into ChatGPT or any of the other Bard or anything else. We have recently blocked those because we were paying for this from a proprietary standpoint. Why risk any other information getting out? So it's just safer that way. So
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure in case somebody
yep.
goes, "Oh, I got a Copilot license, like Copilot personal
Yeah.
license, and I'm just gonna throw it in there." And like, no, it needs to be within your organization's ecosystem. Okay.
Yeah, if you have your own private ecosystem, that's where it works best. Recently, I think we've had like, hey, we're going to load it up and using ours more for customer service. And one of the funnier things that I think I've seen has been in our HR area and more chatbot, but with some machine learning and AI, where people are having conversation, thinking our HR chatbot is actually a real person, and you get to see like long strings of conversation. Hey, I'm on boarded. Thank you for all the help. Can't wait to meet you in person. And the AI doesn't really say anything at that point, but it's funny to see some of those conversations develop. So
AI tool just responds, "Well, this is awkward. Bye." Like, what?
it's like
All
that's not
right.
really, you can't find them in the org chart. Sorry.
Yeah. What about something that I thought would be a pretty good use case for, and Copilot you could use this for, but I was curious, like, to quantify the monetary impact of the findings like you do. I don't think that's super easy for a lot of people, and I don't know how much effort that takes for you all to do that. But I feel like Copilot or any AI tool that you have access to could help potentially guide you through that. So I did want to share that, but I want to bring it
Yep.
back to how did you do that? Like, how do you quantify that impact? Is that relatively intuitive for you, or like as you first did it, it went that's and so here's an example. Let's say there's an issue with terminated users is always classic. So like, how do you quantify? Hey, there's 10 users who've been terminated over the past year, and they still had access to the GL or something like that.
Yeah, and we really don't. I don't. Those are areas where if there's a question, it's like going back to the audit, uh, where we share with audit committee. I won't really try to quantify that because it gets into. I don't want it to devolve into the, what it's worth or not. That's not really the point from the audit finding. The point would be that we're trying to correct uh, that error or mistake, and it could turn into a lot of money, but then it could not as well, right? So, don't I don't try to get into those conversations that can lead into different areas that don't get to my main objective, which is to reduce risk. And so, uh, the quantifiable areas that we get to, the areas that are easy to calculate, are definitely the areas uh, where I want to show the value. Because when you get down to, does audit committee, and executive leadership, is the money well spent in internal audit department? So I've been part. This is part of the reason why we do this is because when you're a part of a couple of teams there where internal audit gets outsourced or we're no longer needed. So I'm a privately held company, they don't need internal audit. So you have to show that valuation and why you need internal audit. And so that's part of the reasons why I kind of show it the way I do, but don't want to get into a discussion or a deep discussion about how we came up with the numbers.
Okay,
So
and I think you hit on that during
yeah,
that question.
yeah.
So I'm glad that I was able to ask that and clarify it for
No,
myself.
that's okay. Good.
Perfect. All right, Mark, I appreciate you coming on. I'm going to throw it to you. The floor is yours. What do you want to leave the audience with?
I think one of the interesting things that you see is just how different and siloed we are. I started my career in finance, uh, creating is in banks, and it was very fascinating in that I remember the president saying, "There's not something we sell that's unique, except the people." And said the people are unique, and that service that we have is unique. He really did instill some sense of what does it mean to be totally engaged into something, a company, a leader, an environment that you're in. I remember walking into work and watching him pick up trash outside, and it's very much about the image and the presentation that you have. Some companies I've gone to, you go through and you say, "There's trash on the ground outside. Is anybody gonna pick it up?" And sometimes I play the whole mental experiment to myself. It's like, I wonder how long many days it's gonna sit there, you know? Now I will pick up stuff on my own because it's like, "Hey, this is gonna drive me crazy." Like, sometimes I see trash in the parking lot, it's like, "I'm just gonna take this and I'll take it in my car, drive home, throw it away, or throw it away when I get to work or whatever." But sometimes I sit out there, it's like, "It's been 5 days, it's been 6 days," you know? Is anybody gonna pick it up? And usually I end up picking it up myself. I remember seeing this slice of cheese just out there, and nobody wants to pick up the wrapped cheese or anything like that, I'm sure, but somebody's got to pick it up. And it's funny because even though I tell myself, I'm gonna go in and walk and clean up this, in the Midwest, you'll see snow on the ground, and you'll see trash somewhere where maybe it's not on directly on your pathway. But are you gonna go pick up that piece of trash, or are you gonna sit there and just walk by it every day? And so I'm gonna walk by it every day because there's a barrier per point where it's like it's not worth the effort to go out there. And we all live within these little cylinders where it's like, yes, I will do this, I would do this, but I won't do that. And so, and figuring out, a lot of internal audits, figuring out like where does everybody have their barriers at? And how you're gonna make people go and care enough to maybe you can't make them go all the way, but can we extend that barrier further? And so a lot of it's relationship management, change management to get people to come along with you and think about things a little bit differently.
Hey everyone, thank you very much for listening to this episode of the Audit Podcast. Whatever platform you're listening on right now, I'm sure there's a subscribe button somewhere, so please hit the subscribe button there. If you're listening through iTunes or Spotify, feel free to go give us that 5-star rating. It only took me about 16 seconds to give myself a 5-star review, and it really helps to get future guests to come on the show, so we'd really appreciate that. Lastly, be sure to check out the show notes and follow us on all our social media channels on Instagram, on LinkedIn, and on TikTok. Also, if interested, please sign up for our weekly newsletter from the Audit Podcast. Thank you all. Have a great one.